Hello and welcome to the Rankin Report for Sunday, October 20th, 2025. Excuse me, October the 19th, 2025. They got a day ahead of myself. Thank you for listening. We're back to an audio recording today, but it's all good. From the book of Jeremiah, chapter 25, verse 9, and then jumping over to verse 29. I will summon all the peoples of the north, and my servant Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, declares the Lord. And I will bring them against this land and its inhabitants, and against all the surrounding nations. I will completely destroy them, and make them an object of horror and scorn, and an everlasting ruin. See, I am beginning to bring disaster on the city that bears my name, and will you indeed go unpunished? You will not go unpunished, for I am calling down a sword on all who live on the earth, declares the Lord Almighty. Jeremiah spoke not only to Israel, but to her neighbors as well, and for the same reasons. God was delivering a form of treatment to his chosen people that would be described by doctors in this age as holistic. Holistic medicine, as defined by the Oxford Dictionary, is, quote, characterized by the treatment of the whole person, taking into account mental and social factors rather than just the symptoms of an illness, unquote. In this spiritual case, God took into account all factors that brought the virus of idolatry to the Israelites. Recall that Israel had lived for 400 years in Egypt before their deliverance by the Lord. Egypt had an entire slew of gods for which they made for which they made statues and drawings. Gods with human form, but with ram's heads, birds' heads, cat heads, you name it. The sun was worshipped, but the dawn was its own separate god. There was a god in charge of the underworld. Two gods, Isis and Osiris, were married. Pharaoh, of course, was a god, and on it went. Now the Israelites recalled the words of their father Jacob and his 12 sons, from which came the 12 tribes of the nation. They knew about the Lord God from the patriarchs of the people, and that the gods of the Egyptians weren't anything. But constant exposure to these chimeras, the human-animal hybrids that made up the Egyptian pantheon, planted the seed of idolatry into the Hebrew people under the domination of Egypt. You cannot look on such things day after day, year after year, century after century, for 400 years and not even be slightly affected by them. Look what happened when Moses went up to Mount Sinai to retrieve the commandments and the law of God. He's gone 40 days. There was no pressure of Egyptian slavery to restrain the idolatrous influence, and the virus eventually presented itself with the symptom of the people making a calf idol, much like the ones probably you saw in Egypt. There was probably a calf god too. Even Aaron, Moses' own brother, the future high priest of Israel, helped them. When the Levites, after Moses' return, went throughout the camp and killed 3,000 Israelites who had gone out of control in their revelry, this could be compared to emergency surgery to remove a cancerous tumor that is in a position to threaten the life of the body of the people. But the cancer had not been completely destroyed. After entering the Promised Land, the Hebrew people, now the nation of Israel, was among Canaanite nations who also worshipped idols, only worse. The cultic practices of these nations included child sacrifice, temple prostitution, and other things that the Lord called abominations, of which he said never even entered his mind for them to do. This is why the Lord ordered Israel to drive out and destroy the Canaanites, their idols, and every trace of the cultic worship they practiced, lest the cancer within them be revived and spread. Read the details in Deuteronomy chapter 7. And spread it did, as soon as the Israelites had rest from war and the influence of Joshua and the heroic generation that conquered Canaan had passed away. Failure to drive out and destroy the Canaanites remaining in the land led to the Canaanites remaining in the land, continuing their cultic practices and reactivating, if you will, the infection of idolatry from its dormant state. The disorder came back on Israel with a vengeance, often leading them to worse practices than the Canaanite nations. So, to preserve the nation and cure the infection, hopefully once and for all, God removed a remnant of the people to a protective exile in Babylon, while the Babylonians themselves not only took over Israel, but the other Canaanite nations through which the infection or the influence of the false gods came. You may have seen reports in the news about operations or surgeries where an organ, let's say the heart, is taken completely out of the body and set on the person's chest in the operating room. The connections of the blood vessels are not severed. The heart continues to beat, but it is removed and set aside so that doctors can work on whatever is in the chest cavity that is causing problems for the heart. So what then is to be done with the nations that teach this generations of Americans to reject the Lord? The diversity of a nation's people is a strength only as long as the people coming from those diverse backgrounds will assimilate their cultures into that of the nation. Throughout American history, most of the peoples who emigrated to the nation came from Europe, which was almost exclusively Christian, having churches in various denominations already well established. This eased the process of assimilation to American culture and welcomed the festivals, dress, and some of the practices of the newcomers. In my birthplace of McKeesport, PA, there is an annual festival called International Village, which features the traditional dress, music, and cuisine of the countries citizens of the town came from. Today, however, new and, I guess a good word would be artificial, subcultures have emerged that not merely ignore, but are actually hostile to Christianity. Ones that, instead of trying to assimilate into the nation, demand that the nation and the gospel itself assimilate into the subculture. Some of these are being pushed upon our young people in school by administrators and teachers who, operating in a twisted kind of idea of diversity, encourage even young children to explore societal and sexual concepts they are much too young to deal with. Remember Hillary Clinton's statement in 2016, plainly stating that quote, deep-seated cultural codes, religious beliefs, and structural biases have to be changed. That remark was taken by many Christians as a declaration of war on their faith and religious liberty in general, and led them to cry out to God for the Great Awakening to begin. Meanwhile, people from other national cultures, many who entered this country illegally, simply refused to assimilate into American culture, using that religious liberty here to try and build up their own faiths and the laws that those faiths bring, building them up into the dominant one in America, forcing it in some cases upon others not of that religion and culture. In such cases, holistic treatment must include dealing with not only the physical but spiritual sources of the infection. A sick person often balks at taking unpleasant tasting medicine or treatments, often described as worse than the disease itself, even though the physician prescribing such treatment knows it will be effective in combating the disease. This administration is presently working to remove illegal immigrants, concentrating its efforts on those who have committed violent acts or who are members of gangs such as Tren de Aragua or MS-13, while encouraging others to self-deport. But this is mere emergency surgery, and many in the government, mostly in the Democratic Party, are working to interfere with it or stop it altogether by any means necessary, legal or otherwise. This, sadly, includes persecution directed at the Christian faith. The more lasting form of treatment is that of the Great Awakening, to change the hearts of those who are under the influence of such opposition and heal this tissue, if you will, restoring the body politic to health. And I'll speak more about that next time. Pray for the Great Awakening, no king but Jesus, independence forever. That's the Rankin Report for Sunday, October 19th, 2025. Thank you for joining me today. God bless you. Have a great day.